How's it going, Goodman game fans around the world? My name is Matt Robertson, otherwise known as Grape Ape, and I'm joined here by.
I'm Stefan, otherwise known as DM Bad Wrong Fun on many of the, well, actually just like a couple of the social medias.
And we will be your co hosts tonight for Goodman Games' outstanding new show, Raw, or Rules as Written. Now, the premise of this show is we're going to take often asked questions in the community and we're going to try to do a deep dive in the rule book and all the material out there to see if we can get you concrete answers on how they are intended to be played and then give you options that are common, popular, for how you can play them. Um, each episode will be joined by a special guest, and tonight's guest is the one and only Julian Bernick. What do you think about that, Stefan?
I'm excited. This is, the new Spellburn. Julian will be here for every single episode. If we can convince him to do that. The odds are low, though. The odds are pretty low on that.
We're going with heavy hitters right out of the gate, and tonight's topic is going to be based on wizards, and in particular, Mercurial Magic. Give us 1 second, and we will be right back with our special guest. All right, we are back, and as promised, here's Julian Bernick. Hello, Julian.
Hello, hello.
Are you excited for the topic tonight? You're somewhat of a source expert.
I have answered many questions on that particular podcast over the years, but I don't claim that all my answers were true or good. And they always seem to get at least two other opinions going. So, hey. But yeah, I am excited. And this is the best thing because I can do this without Brinkman and Goad shouting me down.
All right, well, let's jump right into it. Elena, if you could show us question number 1. Now, this one deals with when selecting the Mercurial Magic. When rolling Mercurial Magic for newly acquired spells, do you use the current luck modifier of the character or the lucky roll modifier? And Julian, just right off the bat, which one do you use?
I am. Okay, so first of all, I'm so used to using pre-gens because all I've been doing is playtesting nonstop that I haven't had this come up in campaign play in a while. But I went back and looked at the rules, and I honestly I would probably rely on my players because I've had pretty DCC steeped players in campaign play. But to my mind, it says on page 19, note that the lucky roll modifier does not change over time as the character's luck changes. So, in my mind, it's fairly clear that you go with that lucky roll modifier, which is going to often, of course, be nil, right? But you take it from there, and so I would not. So if I would not go by their current luck mod if it's different than that.
All right, what about you, Stefan?
I will be the voice against reason. I'm going to go with their current luck modifier, just for the sake of fun more than anything, because I want them to want their luck to change and to be afraid of their luck changing also. I've had a lot of fun in campaigns where it's, oh no, I'm at like a 6 luck, and the wizard is like, I want a quest for luck. I want to not have to do this when I learn my 3rd level spell. I don't want to be that afraid of casting my 3rd level spell.
Yeah, and I usually always went with they use their lucky roll modifier. And so it's usually a positive, sometimes negative. But I think the area where it gets kind of iffy is if we look at handout 1A, Elena, page 49, it says a wizard's luck modifier applies to rolls for corruption, see page 116, and Mercurial Magic, see page 111. So that's right out of the book. First, we have to define luck modifier. The luck modifier that I think they're talking about is just whatever the current modifier is for their luck score. The lucky roll modifier is further described in the occupation part and where you're picking your lucky sign. Well, not your occupation, but when you're picking your lucky sign. And so that stays true for the birth sign. If you look at handout 2A on page 19 in the book, and we are going to be using the 8th printing PDF. There are many different versions out there, but the one we're referencing is the 8th printing because I think that's probably what most people have. Page 19, it says the character's luck modifier affects other rolls in the game. Critical hits, fumbles, corruption, and select other rolls as described henceforth. So that further defines what luck modifier they're talking about because you use the current luck modifier for critical hits and fumbles. Isn't that right, Julian?
Yeah, I think it makes sense in crits and fumbles for sure. I would say, though, that, I mean, and certainly you use it in other places as well. Like when you're adjudicating combats and, you have a single enemy who has multiple targets. I often rely on luck, current luck score, of course, to, pick who's going to get attacked. I'd say that the luck, in my mind, when you're learning a spell, it kind of harkens back to your luck as tied to your original character, your birth sign, your horoscope, your intrinsic nature. I think the rules aren't especially clear, and I think it's entirely legit to play it the other way. But in my mind, it's kind of more tied to your original sort of starting luck mod for that reason. I think that I know it says in the judges section on learning spells and Mercurial and stuff, it talks about, well, a druid's son doesn't learn the spell the same way that an orphan raised by satyrs learns the spell, and that kind of stuff. And that's exactly right. And the orphan, raised by satyrs, I mean, they're implying that the way is related to kind of the character's origins, which I would take to be their starting luck mod versus their current luck mod in that way. It's pretty hazy, and it's definitely an inference and not like an exact direction, because it's hardly clear. But it seems to me that they're saying it's in your stars, it's in your horoscope, it's in your birth sign, it's partially tied to your alignment. And I think it's extremely reasonable to disagree or to deliberately kind of say, to Stefan's point, hey, we're gonna make it, we're gonna make things a little more variable and give you a reason to be more tense about luck in the game and play that resource. Hey, I don't have a big problem. I don't think that is a game breaker in any way.
Yeah, I don't think it's a game breaker either. But let's go to page 110, and this is going to be handout 1C to define when they get the spell, the actual rule in the book. It says when a wizard learns a new spell, he rolls on table 5-2 to determine how that spell manifests in his hands. This percentile roll is adjusted by his luck modifier times 10%, and then it gives an example of +2 luck modifier counts as a +20% on the check. So I think there's definitely a difference between lucky roll modifier, which stays static, stays permanent for the life of the character, and the words luck modifier. I think luck modifier means the current score. What do you think, Stefan?
I agree with you. I'm not sure if I'm right overall about what I have already said. I just know that's how I roll it. But I definitely agree with you on this point from a much more objective stance.
Well, then the problem kind of becomes one of the problems I could see is that if you're playing a 0 level funnel, usually the characters by the end have completely burned a bunch of luck, right? Just to survive. So anybody who decides to become a wizard is going to have potentially a -10 to a -30% on any spells they roll. So that can give a lot of results below the initial roll of 1, which there isn't a table for. There isn't a table for those negative rolls.
Note to future zine makers, there's your opportunity.
So let's say you were doing this, Julian. Let's say you were having a campaign, and your characters just advanced from 2nd to 3rd level, and it's a party of like 4 wizards. They get a new spell. When they pick that new spell, would you have them use their current luck mod or their mod way back from 0 level?
I honestly am probably. I mean, I think as written, I'd probably go with their make it their lucky roll mod, their original luck score. But you know, based on the way players will try to game it at the table and the fact that I don't pay much attention, I'm in practice. I'm probably gonna let them do it without worrying about it too much. It kind of depends if I'm going to. Uh, it's pretty situational if I'm completely honest. If I'm taking a new person through it, and they're trying to be scrupulous, they're really trying to, they don't think they understand how the rule works, and they are really walking me through it and trying to make it play it exactly as written. I'd probably say, go back to your original luck score and use that original modifier. I mean, because in fact, it's interesting. When you look at that original reference to luck modifier, it calls it lucky roll, and it does sort of differentiate it, but then it immediately says the character's luck modifier affects other rolls in the game, and it almost seems to imply that they're talking about the same thing, even though they don't call it the same thing. But it's very, it's probably even meant to be murky.
Yeah, I think
You
it
know,
definitely is. I agree that it's meant to be kind of you can pick which way you want to go. I think if because in the paragraph before that it says this lucky roll, and it has it in quotes, is modified by the character's starting luck. So you definitely got the distinction for that lucky roll modifier right there. But then throughout the rest of the book at higher levels, it's going to talk about just a luck modifier. So you definitely have two different things. And if you look at the other rules that we've quoted, the luck modifier will, go for fumbles, crits, and it also states corruption. If we look in the wizard class, I believe it's handout 1D, if we haven't already shown that. If we look at corruption, it says some results will further direct the player to roll on one of the corruption tables, minor, major, or greater. If this is required, and I did not know this, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone use it. If this roll is required, the roll is 1d10 minus the spell level plus the wizard's luck modifier. Have you guys ever seen that minus the spell
Never
level? I
noticed
had
that.
never noticed that.
No, I have seen that because some of the Dying Earth stuff uses the same um, mechanic very precisely. Wizardly objurgation is something like that, or the witch the witch corruption, demonic corruption, or whatever that's called. So anyway, I've been rolling a heck of a lot of that stuff. That's very familiar to me. But not some. But corruption doesn't always come up so much in the game, of course. Um, it's interesting because if I was going to make an argument for the using that starting the lucky roll mod, the original one, I would say I would use the original when you're doing something that's going to stick with the character forever, and not when you're making an ephemeral roll like a fumble or a what do you call it? Critical, because I think when you're learning a spell, it has cosmic significance and it ties back to your actual kind of cosmic role in life. Are you lucky? Are you unlucky? And so forth. When you but you're going to roll over the course of your career. Well, maybe it may be a long career, or it may be a short career in DCC, but you're going to have bunches of misfires and fumbles and crits and that kind of stuff. And I think, but when you learn a spell and you go through the Mercurial thing, that's going to stick with you for pretty much ever.
There's the long term, the cosmic, like you say, and then there's just having a bad day. So maybe that's where you need to differentiate the birth augur, that lucky modifier, and then your current one.
And by Grimstow in chat, who is John, one of the Goodman Games employees, he said lucky roll is just the birth augur. Final answer, no phone a friend. But I think I tend to have to agree that even though, in my opinion, I think the Mercurial Magic is supposed to be selected with the current luck modifier, I think that would make the game a lot less fun, because I think you'd have a lot more Mercurial Magics that are 1 or below, and the result for that is someone that dies, which can be fun, but if you have 4 spells that are someone dies, pretty soon you're going to run out of people that the character knows.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, in practice, I'm not. It seems like you can certainly run into you can start to skew pretty low on your luck rolls, especially at first level when you go from 0 to first, right? Because you may indeed have spent a lot of luck, as you're saying, Matt, and. Yeah, I mean, that to me is kind of just how you like to play the game and a style choice, and I'm good. I totally am good either way, but it does seem like it could skew you into some pretty terrible Mercurial rolls, which I don't know how fun that gets to be to play. On the other hand, though, once you get past the 0 to 1 thing, you're a lot more likely to be spell burning the heck out of yourself and not burning your luck as much, at least if you can avoid it, right? So then it might not be as impactful.
So if you have a bunch of terrible Mercurial, that sounds like it's kind of like the cheat code for answers in DCC, but maybe you should quest for it. Maybe you should ask your patron for a favor and owe them a big one on your own end.
All right, so
certainly.
Elena, if you could put our question back up there, question number 1. Let's get final answers from the panel here. Question is, when rolling Mercurial Magic for newly acquired spells, do you use the current luck modifier or the lucky roll modifier? Now, to answer this question, I want you guys to go with your interpretation exactly of the rules as written. We'll start with Stefan.
I think as rules as written, you should use that starting luck modifier. I don't know that I'll play it that way, but I think rules as written, you should.
All right. So my answer is, from reading and researching, for rules as written, I think you should use whatever their current luck modifier is to determine the Mercurial Magic. Now, this might not be as fun, and you can absolutely 100% change it, but I think raw is use the current. Julian, what's your final answer?
I'd say that the other thing that I'll think about in terms of my I think if you I don't know, honestly, as raw, I don't think it really comes down very solidly one way or the other. I guess if you want to say that the lucky roll is its own thing, you probably would be pretty solid footing to say. I'd say that your interpretation that the lucky roll modifier is only that original birth augur lucky roll, and that a small L, luck mod that fluctuates game to game, is probably has a little more support in the text. However, I would say that I think the spirit of the game and the sort of cosmic role that luck plays with, your cosmic sort of purpose, your luck, your alignment, and that kind of stuff, and sort of an Appendix N type of feel, leads me back to my original conclusion.
Yeah, I think that is a great final answer. So we'll call that 1.5 to 1.5. Just it looks like it's a tie. So the bottom line is use whatever best works for you guys, whichever is the funnest for you and your players. But that is our interpretation of the rule. And the next question we're going to go to is question number 2. When do Mercurial Magic effects take place during spellcasting? And are they dependent on success or failure of the casting itself? So let's address the first part first. When do Mercurial Magic effects take place during spellcasting? What do you got for that one, Julian?
I'm looking at the thing. It was on page 110 in my PDF. I think that was not the PDF page number, but the text page number, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
But it says when a wizard learns a new spell, he rolls on a table to determine how the spell manifests in his hands. So in my mind, it happens pretty much simultaneously as the casting goes off, if you will, as we tend to say around the table, right? So
Right.
I would say, if you want to really, let's get kind of secondish about it, I'd say it's pretty much simultaneous with the effect actually taking place. In other words, if you're casting Scorching Ray and your Mercurial effect is a Rain of Frogs, you cast the first scorches come out of your fingertips as the Rain of Frogs start to fall down from above, if you know what I'm saying.
All right. And Stefan, what do you think?
Well, you and I were talking about this before the show, and I can't give a definitive answer right now because we noted something that I think is really interesting. In the description for action dice for elves, it says note that the results of Mercurial Magic supersede the action dice. So an elf with high or low spell check die for Mercurial uses that instead. But in the
Let me get
wizard,
Elena to put the hand out there for you. Elena, that's going to be handout 2C that
yeah,
Stefan is referring to. But continue. I'm sorry.
no worries. So, but in the wizard says the wizards note that the results of the Mercurial Magic may modify the action dice based on the dice chain. I'm still flip flopping back and forth whether it only happens if it's a successful casting or it happens on every casting, if it happens when you start casting or at the end, or even if there's a difference between if you're a wizard or an elf. I can't say yet.
So I've always been of the opinion that the Mercurial Magic is situational, and it depends on the situation whether it happens before the casting, during the casting, or after the casting. After doing all this research, I think I'm of the mindset that it happens before or during, kind of simultaneously, like Julian said, and that none of the effects out of the 100 happen after. As Stefan noted on page 57, it says, note that results of Mercurial Magic supersede the action dice. So an elf with a particularly high or low spell check die from the Mercurial Magic uses that result instead, with his total action still limited by his level. So that is one place, one tiny little sentence we found in the book where it said it supersedes the action dice, and that's the only place I found it.
Well,
Like
I mean, but
go ahead.
it's implied in the. I mean, the one of the early not the early, but one of the low results, right, is like extremely difficult spell casting or something, right?
Right.
And it gives you a -2 on your dice to cast the spell. So obviously, you're not casting the spell on a D20, and then suddenly it's triggered that you have to cast it on a D14, right? You always have to cast this spell on a D14, which Matt, of course, goes to what you're saying, that it's situational, and they don't really codify that, but obviously you have to take that effect before. So to me, I think to me that sounds like what you said is right. It's weird how they call that out separately in the elf thing. I don't know. That might just be the way.
I
So
want to
that's
agree with you, Julian. But yeah, it's just like the difference in the actual language used between wizard and elf.
and so
It's
what if
something I
that
noticed 30 minutes ago, so I'm still wondering.
right? What if that's the way it's intended? Because a lot of people say that elves are overpowered. What if this is another limitation to make the elf class a little bit more difficult to play, per se? Or you could definitely play it that way. That Mercurial Magic for the wizard doesn't need to happen every time beforehand, unless it's the situation demands it, like a D14. But for the elf, it definitely would have to. Because if we look at some of the Mercurial Magic, let's look at uh, handout 3B. This is Mercurial Magic number 14, Sleep of Ages. After casting this spell, it doesn't say whether it has to succeed or not. The wizard must make a fort save, DC +5, plus the spell's level, or fall into a deep sleep for 1 day for each level of the spell. He cannot be awakened by any mundane or magical means during this time. So, if you cast Sleep of Ages and the spell fails, you're pretty much out for an entire day. And that can really limit how effective that player enjoys the game.
Oh, I mean, it's already tough enough. You hardly need that to happen on a failure. You know?
Right.
A
Yeah.
good reason to have hirelings.
No, but as to the question of before, during, or after, in my, when I was originally quoting the page 19 thing, or sorry, whatever that was, page 110. When a wizard learns a new spell, he rolls on the table to determine how the spell manifests in his hands. And in my mind, that's really about how the spell manifests, and it implies that only if it manifests, right? If you don't cast it successfully, it doesn't manifest at all. So it's all the how, if you will. And the yeah, it breaks pretty quickly if we start talking about Mercurial Magic on failures.
Right. And it does say manifest. If we also look at page 110, though, one of the parts in there, it says, as a result, the effect of a magical spell varies according to who casts it. So then it kind of specifies casting it as far as that being a separate action. So as soon as it's cast, then it could take place.
Yeah, but I mean, casting is a success state. I would say if you roll a 5 and you don't burn luck and you haven't hit your 12 or 14 and so forth.
So
You've
we
attempted
need
to cast it, but you haven't cast it.
right.
And
So we need to
I'll say that is
define
how I've
casting.
run it.
Yeah, I've always run it that Mercurial Magic is situational, but I think I'm leaning the other way now. Because if we define casting under spell checks on page 106, under the magic section, it says when a character casts a spell, you roll a 1d20 and add your caster level. So that is the action of casting a spell. And so that roll of the dice is the cast of the spell. There's an extra bit in there about applying your luck modifier, but I'm not even going to mention that, even though I just did, because it's wrong. And then it says this is called a spell check. So it defines exactly what casting a spell is. It doesn't say anything about success or failure. It says this is what a spell check is.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that is I don't think cast is typically used in that sense. I think they're meaning to say attempts to cast a spell. Because I think that's because ultimately getting Mercurial, either the really bad effects or the really good effects, even when you fail, becomes kind of a weird is kind of problematic. I mean, I guess you can only fail once, right? Can you fail at casting a spell if it's lost for the day? Can you keep casting it in a failure mode? You can't succeed at it, but
I
can
mean,
you?
if you spell burn to,
You spell burn
I'll
1 point.
I'll say thematically, I think it shouldn't go off when you fail, because DCC is all about how magic. The phlogiston is a wild, wild thing that you cannot control and you can't predict. And so if it happens every time, it is predicted. So
Hmm.
thematically, I don't think it should happen.
And they even kind of talk of that under the Mercurial Magic section on page 110. That you're the firstborn son of a witch, hanged at a trial, wields black magic adroitly, an orphan raised by satyrs, is a precocious student of druidry. Ooh, that's a tough word.
Yeah.
But it says a magical rite invoked by one mage may be more powerful or even different than the same ritual exercised by a peer. These variegations are not predictable, as the subtleties that produce them can never be fully cataloged. So, yeah, I mean, to back your point up, Stefan, it does say that the phlogiston is always in flux, and you never know what you're going to get. Totally forgot where I was going with that, but what do
Well,
you
I can
think?
bring it in. Well, I was gonna
Go
say I
ahead.
can bring it into a slightly other thing. There's one particular spell where I wrote it down on my notes over on the side, but result number 13, the slow cast, where it takes twice as long to cast it. Uh, when when does that take effect? Do you get to roll and then find out it's gonna be 2 rounds before your magic missile goes off, or do you have to wait 2 rounds to find out because then you roll. So that's one of
And
the weird ones I think on this list.
yeah, and Brucifer in chat said that as well. Some take more time to cast, so
Yeah.
I would think that would have to take place uh, before you even roll the spell check.
Yeah, same as the ones that are -1 die or -2 dice. I mean, exactly. Some of them for sure. It just has to be understood. I think that they're modifying how the spells actually cast there rather than simultaneously.
So let's look at a couple more. Let's look at number 4. This is going to be handout 3A. Number 4 is Health Bane. Casting this spell always temporarily reduces the wizard's stamina by 1d3. This ability point loss is in addition to any spell burn and deducted before spell burn occurs. So in this particular Mercurial Magic, it's almost reinforcing the fact that it happens before the dice roll. Because it's saying it happens before even the spell burn is deducted.
Yeah. Oof. That's an interesting thing. I think they're trying to get you they're trying to get the judge out of jail, from arguing with his players about, no, I burnt down to 2 stamina and now I rolled a D3. I rolled a 3 on the D3 and I'm dead. But this makes it clear that you're taking your chances, right? If you really want to go that all out. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It does. Once again, it certainly makes it clear that it affects from the very beginning how the spells cast, including how the spellburn works for it.
If we look at another one, Paul in the Dungeon Crawlers Discord wanted us to touch on number 9, Anima Drain. And I don't have a handout for this one, But it says the wizard suffers corruption every time he casts the spell, regardless of the spell check, unless he spell burns. So that is another one. And so his point was saying, if it says regardless of the spell check, doesn't it mean that's an exception to the rule? And it's telling you that all the others happen after the spell check? Because they made a point to say regardless of spell check. I think that just means whether it's a failure or a success, and not whether it's before or after.
Oh, I think Paul, my favorite, anti-elf racist. I think he's right about this one.
You think? Tell me how you think he's right.
I think that this is kind of subtly saying that for the most part they only happen when the spell is successful, because this one specifically states it always happens regardless of the spell check.
What's your take on that, Julian? Do you think that's why they're saying it?
No, I think, Matt, you have the right idea that they're specifying it because you don't have to roll a 1 and go through the whole misfire chain of commands, order of operations, I should say, to actually get the corruption. That's the way
Maybe
that's
you're
the way
getting double corruption.
you certainly I would say that you could for sure get double corruption on this, right? You could do you could cast the spell and then roll 1 and get it because you get it regardless of the spell check, and then get it because you go through the misfire chain and get it also, right?
Yep.
Unless you spell burn, because you can you're
Unlock.
spell burning to avoid corruption, and you could you spell burn. Now in that situation, would you also allow them yet another spell burn to avoid the second corruption?
It's a good question, because it does state you can use a point of spell burn to avoid corruption. This Anima Drain says the wizard suffers corruption every time he casts a spell. So if we define the word corruption as what it's stated previously in the book, then you could. Well, it says in the back of the spell, unless he spell burns. So he would have to spell burn to avoid that corruption. It'd be a double spell burn.
I'll add on, if you've lost the spell that you have this Mercurial effect for, do you have to spell burn 1 to be able to cast the spell again, and then spell burn another to not get the corruption, or is just the 1 to get it back enough?
Well, I think those cases would be rare, very rare. But I mean, rules is written. I say you'd have to spell burn 3 points to avoid all that corruption. All right, let's look at another one, number 70. And this was I went through each Mercurial Magic and I said, could I do this before I find out if the spell is a success or failure? And number 70 was kind of the only one I was a little hesitant on. But my answer was yes, I could do them all before the spell check was known. 70 Temporal Echo says each time the wizard casts this spell, he predicts the numerical result of his spell check roll. If he rolls this number exactly, the spell automatically recasts itself each round for 1d3 rounds. The predicted result must be a successful spell check. Predicting a failed result has no effect. So this one kind of comes with its own terms, that if you follow the fact that Mercurial Magic happens every time regardless, this one wouldn't. Because there's nothing happens on a failed effect, just because of what the Mercurial Magic is.
Now, so luck modifies. It can modify any roll, right?
Correct.
So what if your wizard predicts the numerical result of his spell check roll? He has got number 70, Temporal Echo. He gets a 14. He's a total. I'm assuming this is your total spell check roll, right? So he's predicted that he's going to get a 16. He ends up with a 14.
I see what you're saying and where you're going with this.
And
And I like your thinking.
he could burn 2 luck points to get to a 16. Now he says the numerical result of his spell check roll, if he rolls this number exactly.
Right. That's the kicker right there.
So it's not. So it seems to imply that it's not your total roll; it's the unmodified die roll.
Right. And that kind of goes back to, can you burn luck to make a crit happen? You can burn it up to a 20, but that still doesn't make it become a critical hit, which is another hotly debated topic.
Yeah, I don't think you can cheese your way into this one. So that it's an attractive idea, but I don't think you can do it.
So let's look at a couple other ones just for fun. 23, Cannibal Magic. Caster suffers damage equal to 1d4 plus the spell's level each time he casts it, unless he's physically touching another individual willing to suffer the damage in his stead. Unwilling or unknowing individuals can be forced to suffer for the wizard. So my thinking on making Mercurial Magics happen every time is that some of these effects, it adds another layer to Mercurial casting and Mercurial Magic. Even if the spell fails, he's still going to do 1d4 plus the spell level damage to something.
I don't purely from a gameplay standpoint. Me and Matt are very familiar with this. I ran a game this weekend where the wizard had this as his Mercurial effect for sleep, and he had 4 health because it was a level 1 game. He didn't cast sleep once because he was very scared of that 1d4 plus 1 roll, even if he was touching a friend. But so just purely from a let them cast their spells standpoint, I'll say only on successes because that is really rough otherwise.
You got to look at it. So I want everybody watching and everybody who watches this to think, go through the Mercurial Magic list and say, could this one happen, whether I know it's a success or not? I didn't find any that I think couldn't happen. But Julian, what do you think about the fact that in the elf specifically, it says supersedes the spell check?
Yeah, I'm gonna look back at that.
What if that is another limitation on the elf class that makes them a little less OP?
It doesn't seem. I want a use case for that because it sounds like that applies to wizards too, and they just called it out differently. But that doesn't seem. Then why would they call it out? You know what I'm saying? So let's
Right.
see. Note that the results of Mercurial Magic supersede the action dice. So it's in the action dice category. Note that the results of Mercurial Magic supersede the action dice. So an elf with a particularly high or low spell check die for Mercurial Magic uses that result instead, with his total actions still limited by his level. But the way it's written, it does sort of imply that somehow the wizard doesn't have this effect. But if the wizard gets that extremely low result, which is one of the lowest ones in the Mercurial Magic chart, does the wizard not get that penalty? That doesn't seem kosher to me in the slightest.
That's a good question. The opposite end of the spectrum.
Overall, I'll think it's just a DCC has funny wording in some places because it's DCC, and at some points it's just purposefully written to be a little vague so that you can do it how you want to do it and make your game the way you want your game to be made. You don't have to feel like you need extra special permission.
I would say that having edited a lot of manuscripts over the last few years, it sounds like they might have put that blurb in both classes, and they might have only struck it from one. They might have forgot to remove it from the elf and left it. Like it might have originally matched in both classes, and they maybe didn't realize that they had it in one but not the other. Because I just can't imagine that it works one way for the wizard and one way for the elf. Otherwise, when you rolled an O2 on Mercurial Magic, I mean, there's nothing in here. In fact, not only is it says extremely difficult to cast, instead of rolling as normal in a spell check, the wizard rolls a die type reduced by 2 steps on the die chain.
That does reinforce the thought that it should say that for both of them, the supersede part.
Yeah.
And I think for the elf, I think the word supersede is meant to be referencing the action dice itself and not the mercurial magic. So I think it's just kind of worded incorrectly in that it references the mercurial magic and where it's just trying to highlight the action dice itself. Because it says that later on, that you might use a different action dice.
It may have also been an editing thing for clarity, since some of the elves' magic descriptions are just, as per the wizard, essentially.
So definitely, for any of those people out there that thinks elves are a little too OP, that could be another element that you put into your game. You can have their mercurial magic happen no matter what.
Maybe that's the newest fan third-party class. That's their special thing.
I think it could be either good or bad.
Oh, certainly.
So let's talk about our final answers on this one. When do mercurial magic effects take place during spellcasting? So Stefan, final answer.
It depends on the mercurial effect, but generally it happens simultaneously when the spell is successfully completed.
All right, so you say it's dependent. I say based on the rules as written in the book, if I was on an island with only this book and read it, and that was the only way I could understand it, I think they happen every time, regardless of a success or a failure. Julian, you got the deciding vote.
I'm gonna say I've always played it as success only, and I don't see any. I don't really feel anything dissuades me here. Um, and as I would say my rule. I feel just from reading and going through the Mercurial for years, in my mind it's pretty clear they have to be simultaneous unless the result is just clear that it has to be essentially modifying the actual casting process, like a different die or the slow casting and that kind of stuff.
So you say situational. That's 2 for situational, 1 for it happens every time, regardless. That is your final answer on that question. In regards to either of the questions, have you guys seen or played with anyone who's done anything different, or are there any house rules out there that you know of for Mercurial Magic?
Oh, I was thinking today as I was going through some of these rules, it would be pretty interesting to see, a few games where people ran it Mercurial with failures, but I can't say that I've run one or played in one.
I will have to post one, and you'll have to play the wizard, because I think my next game I'm going to try it, and I'm going to come back and let everyone know how it goes.
I have sometimes run with the house rule that you can spend a point of luck to overcome your mercurial magic, which players will do, and I love taking luck from them, so I'm willing to do it.
Stefan, do you mean like on a one-time basis, or do you mean?
Just a one-time bait. Yeah, you're you're casting the spell at great cost. You don't want to kill someone you know. Give me a luck, and it won't happen just this time.
Anything else out there that you've seen, Stefan?
Nothing else.
I'm just going to point out, since luck modifies any roll, you would have been much better advised to spend that luck originally, at least to try to boost it from an 01 to an 02. I mean, it might be pretty amusing to keep killing your party of guys, but
hindsight's 2020 for them, especially when you give them pre-gens and they don't have a choice.
yeah, that's true.
All right. Well, Julian, thank you very much for being our guest on Raw, the very first episode. Do you have anything going on in your world? What's going on over in your neck of the woods?
I am just trying to get back into some normal gaming. We've been doing a little bit here around the table, working on an Empire of the East adventure. I'm doing a playtest of that this weekend at Romance of the Cyclops Con. And that's been most of my stuff. Just head down, working on the manuscript, doing some playtesting. Also, way out in the hopper somewhere, I have a third-party Mutant Crawl Classics adventure, but that's probably a 2023 type thing. Matt, you might remember it's the Crazy Installation 665 adventure that I think you were one of the playtesters on.
It was that where the one of the players was upset because she couldn't put on the suit or she couldn't fly or something like that.
We that I don't know why it is about that adventure, but we did have I had a few real characters have issues with not really the adventure as much as MCC in general. Maybe sometimes my GMing, but
I thought your
yeah.
GM was great.
Well, it was that was an interesting one. That player came in and said, I think you have to warn people if the game, not meaning, MCC itself, isn't really going to be balanced. And we're like, oh.
My sweet summer child.
Yeah, she was pretty upset that her characters were dying. So
Yeah. But anyway, we're having I'm doing that with Purple Pirate, and they're working on it. It's a long painstaking thing. They, if anybody knows Scott and Purple Pirate stuff, they put a ton of work into getting amazing art, and I've seen a few little pieces and stuff, but I can't wait to see what this is going to look like. I'm really psyched.
nice. Thanks for having us on. Thank you for being on. I mean, Stefan, do you have any final words before we go?
Yep. Yeah, I'm also actually doing my own thing. I got an MCC Kickstarter happening June 14th. I just dropped the link in the Twitch chat for more multiversal shenanigans, a Judges Toolkit, and also a new adventure. So it's gonna be a little probably about 48 pages. So it'll be a pretty big chunky zine.
Can we get a preview of what the title is?
Oh yeah, Mysteries of the Multiverse. I did Merchants of the Multiverse last year during Zine Quest, and this one's coming a little bit later, but another one of those. So more stuff for roaming through Terra AD.
Oh, I had to go on a little walkabout because I forgot my charging cord in the bedroom, so I had to move out of my game room, but threw me off a little bit. Guys, if you guys like Raw, tune in 2 weeks from today. It'll be every 2-week show where we'll discuss more rules. Next episode is going to be an episode about clerics. And so we're going to dive into some of the questions people have about clerics. If you have questions, you can join the Dungeon Crawler server. There is a room in there called Rules is Written, a text chat. And if you say, Dear Raw, this is the question I have about this, you can type your questions on there, and maybe we'll get to it in one of these episodes. Thanks, everybody, for being with us tonight, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
With a new mystery guest. Maybe it'll be Jeff Good. I think he loves talking about clerics.
I've got some big guests lined up, and we want to start with Julian.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's been a blast.
All right. We'll see you later, everyone.